Imagine a deranged madman, armed with a bag of makeshift weapons and a twisted sense of creativity, hell-bent on ending your life in the most absurdly horrific ways. What would you do? Art's humor is as sick as it gets. To him, the only punchline that matters is the kind that leaves someone broken, in the worst possible way. And that's a nightmare for our protagonists, who are unfortunate enough to find themselves trapped in his twisted game. I'm about to break down Terrifier 3, pointing out every mistake made and showing you exactly why survival in this nightmare is an impossibility. It's just a few nights before Christmas in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and I'm sure nothing sinister could possibly happen here. The parents are sound asleep when their young daughter, Jules, walks in, claiming she heard something on the roof. Naturally, her mother dismisses it as imagination running wild, but little does she know, that will be the mistake that costs them everything. A little while later, Jules is jolted awake by strange noises echoing through the house. She cautiously peeks downstairs, and there he is, Santa. But something's off. He's just standing there, motionless, in front of the tree. The girl cowers behind the door, her breath shallow as she watches Santa slowly pull an axe from his bloodied sack. His boots creak against the wooden floor as he ascends the stairs, each step heavier with purpose. Next on his list, dear old mom and dad. Meanwhile, Jen stirs in her bed, groggy and irritated by the wet, rhythmic sound coming from the other side. She groans and opens her eyes, only for her annoyance to twist into terror. In the dim glow of the room, she sees him, Santa, his face a grotesque grin as he drives the axe again and again into her husband's skull. Each swing sprang crimson across the sheets. Jen's scream catches in her throat, but Santa doesn't stop. He's not done yet. She flees, her screams echoing through the house, and throws herself against a door, desperately trying to hold it shut. But Artie is relentless. The axe smashes through the wood with a deafening crack, his shadow stalking her as she darts from room to room, her panic growing with each step. Finally, he corners her. With a vicious swing, the axe slices through her arm, severing it in a spray of blood. Her shriek is cut short as he delivers the final blow, the blade splitting her skull with a sickening crunch. After a long night of carnage, Art takes a moment to unwind with some milk and cookies, even tidying up the dishes afterward, as if he hadn't just painted the house red. If you know anything about Art the Clown, though, their fate was sealed the moment he arrived. Regular methods won't stop him. He shrugs off injuries that would kill anyone else without a second thought. Even going for the head won't do the trick. Art has a knack for resurrection, always coming back, no matter how final the kill seems. In the end, you don't survive Art. You endure him, until you can't. Looking back, could this family have done anything to avoid their gruesome fate? Absolutely not. The kid mentioned hearing footsteps on the roof, and sure, given the holiday season, it's easy for the parents to assume it's the little girl's imagination pretending to hear Santa. But when you spot that your retarded husband left the front door wide open all night, maybe you'd think to check the house before crawling back into bed. Not that it would have changed much. Art's not the kind of problem you can outsmart. Still, at least they wouldn't have been caught sleeping gift-wrapped for him to take an effortless kill. Instead, they served themselves up on a platter, making his bloody work all the easier. When she woke to the nightmare of Art hacking her husband to pieces, it was already too late. She did the only thing she could: run. But bolting out the front door wasn't an option. Her kids were still in the house. Desperation forced her to lead Art on a frantic chase through the rooms, knowing full well that an unarmed woman stood little chance against a bloodthirsty, axe-wielding maniac. Her husband and son never even had a chance, slaughtered in their sleep before they could react. The daughter, on the other hand, might have survived. If only she'd stayed quiet. Art hadn't known she was there, and silence could have been her saving grace. But in a house drenched in chaos, safety is never guaranteed. The film flashes back 5 years, where an unfortunate officer stumbles upon Art's headless body in the basement beneath the Terrifier ride. Dispatch informs him that backup is on the way, but it won't arrive in time. The moment the officer looks away, the body jerks to life, rising up with unnatural strength. It grabs him, choking the life out of him while taking 2 bullets to the chest without so much as flinching. Art stumbles onto the subway car, his own head replaced by the severed, bloodied one of his latest victim, held in place with grotesque precision. The train rattles along as he makes his way toward the psychiatric hospital, a twisted purpose in his gait. Inside the facility, the night air is shattered by a blood-curdling scream from Victoria's cell. You remember Vicky, right? The one whose face was torn off by Art? Driven mad after the brutal attack on that reporter? Well, she just gave birth to Art's head. Now the two of them kneel over the mangled remains of the nurse, who was unlucky enough to cross their path, cackling in twisted delight. The woman pins the security guard against the wall, her grip like iron, just as Art's headless body strides in, his presence a death sentence. Together, they take turns, using their bare hands to rip his face apart, tearing through flesh with savage precision. Meanwhile, baby Art, his twisted smile untouched by the chaos, sits gleefully on the floor, watching it all unfold. They take the train back to the abandoned house where Art keeps his twisted lair. Along the way, he indulges in a brief moment of cruel amusement, posing for some photos with an eager cosplayer. But the joy is fleeting. Off-screen, the cosplayer's life is snuffed out, a victim of Art's relentless bloodlust. In the end, Art steals the man's hat and bicycle horn, adding them to his collection of grotesque trophies, a silent reminder of his ever-growing madness. Vicky, lost in her madness, decides to soak in a tub filled with her own blood, letting the crimson waters consume her as she reclines in twisted peace. Meanwhile, Art takes a seat in an old rocking chair in the attic, his presence unsettling as he rocks back and forth in eerie stillness. The years pass, but neither of them move. For the next 5 years, they remain frozen in time, trapped in their own grotesque rituals, as if the world outside has forgotten they exist. Back in the present day, Sienna is finally coming home after a long stint at the Grippy Socks Hotel. She's staying with her Uncle Greg, Aunt Jess, and their young daughter Gabby. Gabby, in awe of her cool older cousin, can't wait to show Sienna the bedroom they've prepared for her, decked out in all of Sienna's favorite fantasy-themed decorations. The room is a colorful escape, a stark contrast to the darkness that Sienna's been through, and Gabby's excitement fills the air as she eagerly leads her cousin to her new sanctuary. A pair of demolition workers pull up to Art's old house, completely unaware that the place is a trap in more ways than one. Jackson, ever the prankster, decides to spook his buddy Dennis with a made-up story about a psychotic killer who used to live there. They've still got work to do, though. Clear the place out before it's torn down. Dennis heads upstairs while Jackson checks the first floor, but it doesn't take long before things take a sinister turn. Jackson notices a flickering light coming from down the hall, and his curiosity leads him straight to a horrifying discovery: Vicky's mangled body, left in grotesque stillness. Meanwhile, Dennis, exploring the upstairs attic, crosses paths with something far worse, a creepy clown, its twisted grin the last thing he'll ever see. As Jackson and Dennis lean in for a closer look, the air thick with tension, Art suddenly lunges. In an instant, he grabs Dennis by the face, throwing him into the wall with bone-crushing force. At the same time, Vicky, her body a twisted reflection of the horrors she's endured, plunges a shard of broken glass deep into Jackson's neck, blood spraying as he gasps in agony. Jackson's death is swift. Dennis is not so lucky. Struggling to get up, he's forced back down, Art using a massive nail to pin his hand to the floor. The agony intensifies as Art, with grim precision, bites off 2 of Dennis's fingers, the sickening crunch echoing in the attic's suffocating silence. With a sickening grin, Art pulls out a box cutter, its blade gleaming in the dim light. He presses it against Dennis's scalp, the sharp edge cutting through flesh with cruel ease. Slowly, methodically, he slices open the man's head, peeling back the skin like a twisted, grotesque mask. Hart works with savage precision, tearing the 2 halves apart until at last, Dennis's entire face is ripped from his skull, leaving only a bloody, empty void where his humanity once was. The sound of skin tearing fills the room, a horrific reminder of the madness that has overtaken this place. These 2 never stood a chance. They had no idea they were walking into a death trap, oblivious to the danger lurking just beneath the surface. By the time they realized what was happening, the corpses they thought were lifeless had already come to life, tearing them apart with vicious speed. Caught off guard, blindsided by the horrors they never saw coming, There was no hope for survival. No one could prepare for the nightmare they walked into. Once Art and Vicky were on the move, escape was impossible. Back at her aunt's house, Sienna tries to get through a normal dinner with the family, but her mind won't let her rest. As she attempts to focus on the conversation around the table, she's haunted by visions of her dead friend Brooke. In every flicker of her mind, Brooke's accusing eyes burn into her, blaming Sienna for her death. "Pass the rice," Brooke demands in a voice that cuts through the tension like a knife. The whispers in her head grow louder, more insistent. Sienna feels the walls closing in, the weight of her guilt and grief unbearable. Knowing she's on the verge of a full-blown meltdown, she forces herself to stand, excusing herself from the table before the panic consumes her completely. Sienna's younger brother Jonathan is now in college, but things aren't going smoothly for him. He's constantly being harassed by his roommate's girlfriend Mia, a true crime podcaster with a dangerously obsessive fascination with the Miles County clown. Sienna calls to check in, excited to see him again over the holiday. But Gabby, ever the perceptive one, can tell that something is weighing on her cousin. Sienna's tension is palpable, so Gabby suggests they do some face painting to help her unwind and clear her mind. The two girls sit down, brushes in hand, transforming their faces into colorful works of art, an unexpected but comforting distraction from the darkness that keeps creeping back into Sienna's life. What they don't know is that Art is already deep into his own creative project, one that's far darker and far more twisted. Down in his evil lair, Art meticulously assembles a device designed to unleash a chilling stream of liquid nitrogen from a tank. With a sickening sense of satisfaction, he tests it out on a helpless little rat, the freezing vapor encasing the creature in seconds, turning it into a frozen, lifeless shell. Art's twisted imagination is just getting started, and the horrors he's planning are only beginning to take shape. Later that night, at a bar somewhere in town, a mall Santa is enjoying the attention of some admiring ladies, basking in the holiday cheer. But there's someone else who's been eyeing him from outside. Through the window, Art spots his target, his twisted grin forming as he slinks into the bar, his own bag of toys slung over his shoulder. Bursting through the door with unnerving enthusiasm, he starts acting like a jolly old Saint Nick, his excitement disturbingly out of place. But instead of spreading cheer, Art has other plans that will quickly turn the night into a nightmare. When the mall Santa motions for Art to come on over, ever the true professional, the Santa refuses to break character. Even when Art yanks on his beard, Santa remains stoic, playing his part. The bartender, sensing something off, makes the fatal mistake of asking, "What's in the bag?" Art's grin widens, just as he'd been waiting for this moment. With a manic gleam in his eye, he pulls out a tiny bicycle horn and honks it directly in their faces, the sound jarring and unnervingly loud. The shenanigans continue, the air thick with tension as the crowd laughs uneasily. The bartender, growing increasingly irritated, tries to regain control of the situation. "Can I see some identification?" he asks, thinking this will end the bizarre encounter. With a twisted glee, Art pulls out an ID, one that he'd stolen from one of the two demolition guy's workers earlier. The bartender can clearly see that this is not Art, but Santa insists it's fine. Art spits the drink into Santa's face, then begins pissing his pants while still sitting on Santa's lap. Even Santa seems to reach his breaking point. The bartender begins to throw him out, and Santa wants to throw some hands, but Art is not interested in fair fights. He pulls out a gun with a deadly calm, shooting the two men dead without hesitation. The room falls silent, the air thick with terror, as Art turns his attention solely to Santa Claus. Now, it's just the two of them, and they'll have to settle things the only way Art knows how. Terrified, pleads for his life, desperately trying to appeal to Art's supposed human side, but his words fall on deaf ears. Instead of letting him go, Art's grin widens as he strips the man out of his Santa costume. Art ties him to a chair, preparing to deliver a twisted version of holiday cheer. But Art isn't done yet. There's one last touch he needs to complete his festive look, the signature white beard. Reaching into his bag, Art pulls out the liquid nitrogen sprayer, a sadistic glint in his eyes. He begins freezing the man's arms and legs, the gas hissing as it engulfs his limbs in ice. Screams, in excruciating pain. But the laughter in Art's eyes only grows louder as he continues his cruel work, turning the man's body into a frozen, tortured shell. With the body frozen solid, Art's grin widens further. He grabs a hammer with brutal intent, smashing the frozen limbs apart like fragile glass, the sickening crunches echoing in the room. The man's screams are barely audible over the sound of ice breaking, his body a shattered, frozen mess. Not content with the chaos he's already unleashed, Art picks up the liquid nitrogen tank again, spraying a blast straight through the bartender's head. The frost eats into his skull, freezing it in an instant. Then, with a twisted chuckle, Art grabs the hammer once more and shatters half of the man's skull, his agonizing cries barely audible under the weight of the madness. With the gruesome task almost complete, Art peels off the bartender's beard, ripping it from his face, before replacing it with a large, grotesque carrot, his twisted version of a Christmas decoration. The horror in the room is palpable, and Art stands back, admiring his handiwork with sick satisfaction. You'd think that someone walking into the bar looking like Art and exuding pure menace would immediately set off alarm bells. After all, it's Christmas, not Halloween. But clearly these guys have terrible situational awareness. Even if they'd recognized Art as an immediate threat the second he stepped in, it wouldn't have made a difference. If all he had was an axe, maybe the three of them could have tried to fight him off. Though it's doubtful they'd stand much of a chance, but since Art wasn't just wielding an axe but also packing heat, they didn't stand a chance from the start. Sienna and Gabby head to the mall for some Christmas shopping. The atmosphere is festive, bustling with holiday cheer, until Sienna freezes mid-step. A chillingly familiar jingle drifts through the speakers, The Clown Cafe, that sinister tune she thought she'd never hear again. Her blood runs cold as her gaze drifts toward the mall entrance, and there he is, her nightmare made flesh. Art, now in his grotesque new Santa costume, stands there, playfully waving as if greeting an old friend. Panic grips her chest and tears silently stream down her face, paralyzing her with terror. Gabby, sensing something is wrong, tugs on her arm, snapping her back to reality. Sienna desperately tries to convince herself it might not be him, maybe it's just someone in costume, a cruel coincidence. But deep down, she knows the truth. This nightmare isn't over yet. After the unpleasant visit to the mall, Sienna goes to visit Jonathan at college. She wants him to come over a few nights early, but he turns her down, saying he's already going to a party. Jonathan's roommate and his annoying girlfriend with the podcast shows up. She immediately recognizes Sienna and starts begging her to come onto her podcast for an interview about her experience facing off against the Miles County Clown. After Sienna puts that bitch in her place, she finally decides to tell her brother that Art has returned. But he hesitates to believe her. He'd rather leave it all behind and move on with their lives. However, she reminds him of the letters he wrote back when he was still taking things seriously. His research aligns perfectly with the recent events, and she correctly deduces that the demonic spirit must be using Victoria as its new vessel. After that, Sienna heads off to retrieve her father's magic sword, which she had buried at the amusement park. Back at his dorm, Jonathan is losing it, completely freaking out. He's convinced that his sister must be going crazy, and now maybe he is too. Meanwhile, Sienna returns to the house with the sword in hand, carrying a gift-wrapped box to hide it behind the Christmas tree. Just as she is setting it down, Gabby almost catches her in the act. The girl notices her hands are dirty, but she quickly lies, claiming she fell on the way home. She rushes up to the bathroom to clean up. What she doesn't know is that Art has arrived at the Beta House Christmas Bash, the same party her brother is supposed to attend. But Art isn't going for him. He has chosen another, an unsuspecting soul to torment first. Cut to Jonathan's roommate, Cole, and his girlfriend Mia, who is still obsessively trying to get Jonathan on her podcast. They have no clue that her real dream guest is already inside the house. The Miles County Clown himself is standing just outside their door, eavesdropping as Mia fantasizes about what it would be like to meet him face to face. She won't have to imagine for much longer, though. Art knows exactly what's about to happen between the two of them, and he's decided to make Mia's twisted dream come true. Back at the house, the girls are huddled around the table playing a board game when something on the TV catches their attention. It's a news report about the explosion at the mall, and an eyewitness claims to have seen a strange man in his Santa costume at the scene. The blood drains from Sienna's face as she realizes the truth. Only one twisted, maniacal mime could be behind this. Panic grips her and she finally admits it. The clown is back. Desperately, she tries to warn them all, but the weight of the danger is heavy in her voice. None of them are safe. The parents are still unsure whether they should believe her, but Sienna insists on calling Jonathan right then and there. Though she can barely get the words out, her panic is palpable. Jonathan promises to come as soon as he can, though she can hear the doubt in his voice. Once Sienna finally begins to calm down, Aunt Jess tries to ease the tension, giving her something to help her sleep, convinced that it's all just in her niece's mind. The doubt lingers, and they're starting to regret letting her stay there, but Uncle Greg, ever the skeptic, heads out to pick up Jonathan, unaware that it will be the last time they'll ever see each other alive. Meanwhile, Art follows Cole to the showers, where he and Mia start to get intimate. But their night takes a horrific turn when Art pulls out a chainsaw from his large bag of twisted toys. Cole fights back as best as he can, but it's no match for Art's brutality. He loses a couple of fingers before Art slices off one of his legs, and Cole desperately tries to crawl away. As her boyfriend bleeds out on the floor, Mia finally gets the face-to-face encounter with the Miles County clown that she's always dreamed of, only it's nothing like she imagined. Art opens her chest, slices through her stomach, and then begins tearing apart her face in an unrelenting, brutal attack, all while she's still alive. Before finishing her off, he leans in and places his holiday glasses on her, a twisted gift. But he's not done yet. Cole, still alive and struggling on the floor, is barely hanging on. After tearing off his other leg, Art takes the chainsaw and drives it into Cole's body, cutting him almost in half. As their lifeless bodies lie steaming on the floor, Art lies down, gleefully making a snow angel in the blood and guts. He caught them with their pants down, cornered in a tight, confined space, with no room to escape or take cover. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Every inch of the space felt suffocating, making it nearly impossible to fight back. To make matters worse, Art wielded an absolutely horrifying weapon, a chainsaw that would be deadly with a single strike. Meanwhile, the two of them were left with nothing but their bare hands. Uncle Greg arrives at the dorms to pick up Jonathan, but when he calls, the voice on the other end seems off, strange, distant, almost not his nephew at all. What he doesn't realize is that it's the demon impersonating Jonathan, its twisted presence creeping through the phone line. Meanwhile, Sienna is trapped in a vivid dream, reliving the memory of the day her father first drew her as an angel warrior, poised and ready to fight the forces of evil with her badass flaming sword. She had loved it, feeling unstoppable in the picture. But when she tried to take it, her father's face turned a deep shade of red. He clutched the drawing with an iron grip, a fearful look in his eyes. In that moment, Sienna understood that her father had seen something dark in the future, horrifying battles she would eventually have to endure. Sienna wakes up from the nightmare, the clock showing just before 2 in the morning. She can hear her parents arguing downstairs. Staying quiet, she sneaks down, trying not to make a sound, but the voices grow louder as the argument escalates. "We should just kill her while we still can," one of them says, and the words hit her like a cold slap. Her heart races, but it's already too late. By the time she fully understands what's happening, the house is no longer a sanctuary. She turns into the kitchen and her blood runs cold. There, standing at the oven, is Victoria, her movements eerie and unnatural. But what really freezes Sienna in place is what she sees on the wall. Art, in all his grotesque glory, is busy nailing the headless body of Cole, the roommate, up to the wall, his twisted handiwork a horrifying sight. Panic surges through Sienna as she turns and bolts back toward the stairs, her heart hammering in her chest. But Art is faster. He grabs her by the leg, dragging her back down with terrifying strength. She fights back, kicking him hard enough to knock him off balance, but it's not enough. In an instant, Art grabs her again, lifting her effortlessly and throwing her through the coffee table. The glass shatters around her, but her focus is on the sword, the one thing that might save her. But before she can grab it, Art slams her over the head with his heavy mallet. The impact is brutal and darkness swarms around her as she's knocked out cold, her body crumpling to the floor. When Sienna wakes up, her head throbs and panic sets in as she realizes she's been tied to a chair, duct tape covering her mouth to stifle any sound. Her eyes scan the room, heart sinking when she sees Aunt Jess, tied up in the same way on the other side. Between them on the table lies a bloody, horrifying object, a twisted message, making it clear that Art and the clown have something far worse in store for them. Art strolls in, giving Sienna a playful smack on the head, almost mockingly. He moves over to the corner, hanging the roommate's disemboweled guts on the Christmas tree like some sick, festive decoration. Her eyes widen as she looks up, her stomach dropping. At the top of the tree, where the star should be, rests Uncle Greg's severed head. The scene is a nightmarish vision of horror, and Sienna knows it's just the beginning of the terror they're about to face. There's still one family member missing, and the dread gnaws at Sienna's mind. But then, Art opens the present on the table, and the room falls deathly silent. Inside, nestled in the gift wrap, is a human skull, its flesh completely eaten off by the clown's pet rats. The gruesome sight sends a chill down her spine as Art grins, his twisted pleasure evident. Aunt Jess, her face pale and strained, looks at Sienna with a mixture of love and regret. "I love you," she says, her voice trembling. "Get revenge for our family." I don't know what about this situation makes her think she would be able to do that. She must know Sienna has plot armor. Art grabs a long plastic tube and, with brutal precision, forces it down Aunt Jess's throat. The sickening sound of her struggling gasps fills the room, but there's no escape. Sienna can only watch, helpless, as Art calmly grabs the rats and begins shoving them into the tube, one after the other. With Aunt Jess now dead, the room grows even darker, and a cold, suffocating dread fills the air. Vicky, her face twisted in malicious glee, steps towards Sienna. She grabs a crown of thorns and, with cruel precision, forces it down onto Sienna's head. Desperation floods Sienna as the pain from the crown of thorns sears through her head. She can barely think, but she still tries, offering a deal in a last-ditch effort to save the girl. "I'll give up," she says through gritted teeth, "if you let her go." But Vicky's smile is cold and twisted, void of any empathy. She's not interested in negotiation, not with someone who has nothing left to offer. Meanwhile, Art calmly picks up the human skull from the table, his movements almost leisurely. He walks over to the fireplace, placing it above the mantel, and then casually puts on Jonathan's glasses. The sight is grotesque, the final insult. With a sadistic grin, Art looks at Sienna, and she realizes that the skull is Jonathan's. Personally, I don't believe that it is Jonathan. I think if they were going to kill him, they would not do it off screen. It's hard to tell because the skull is covered in blood, but the eyes look blue and Jonathan has brown eyes. But his roommate's annoying girlfriend has blue eyes, so I think it is probably her skull. I guess we will find out in the next movie. In her moment of weakness, as the demon claws at her mind, through sheer willpower she manages to resist. Frustrated by her resistance, the clowns turn their rage on the only person left they can torment, Gabby. As Art holds a knife to her throat, Gabby looks up, her face filled with regret. "I'm sorry," she says, voice shaking, "for not giving you my present." The demons decide to let Sienna open one last Christmas gift. Art decides to have a little fun first. He slams a hammer down onto her hands with a sickening crunch. As she is trying to open the box with her mangled hands, Art has to have his own fun and continues to hit her while she struggles to open it. Sienna, her hands still mangled, finally pulls the sword from the box. Without a second thought, she swings it at Art, slashing across his throat in a swift, powerful arc. The blade cuts deep and blood sprays out. She cuts through the ropes binding her. With a feral cry, she flings the blade from her hand like a spear, sending it hurtling through the air. Okay, let's pull it back for a second. These two have her dead to rights, and they bring her the only weapon that can kill them. The only way this plays out like this is in a Hollywood movie. If you or I were in this situation, we would end up looking like Kris Kringle over here. Sienna and Gabby's discussion gets interrupted by Art when he comes flying in with a chainsaw. This girl is not very bright to turn her back on Art. She literally cut Art's head off in the last movie and he came back. A slash to his throat is definitely not gonna put him down. She should not be able to fight Art at all with her mangled hands, but fortunately her magic sword turns her into Wolverine. After fighting back and forth for a bit, Sienna gets the upper hand and pins Art to the wall with the sword. Just as it looks like Art is done for, his eyes turn a ghostly white and his blood eats through the floor, opening a portal into hell, causing Gabby to fall down into it. As Gabby is hanging on for dear life, Sienna runs over and uses the sword to try and pull her up. But the sword slices through her hands and both Gabby and the sword falls down into the pit. Okay, what a retard. Let's use single most important item in the world when it comes to stopping Art or any other demon to try and pull her up. She should have just let her fall and used the sword to finish off Art. Without the other demon possessing someone, there is a chance he would not be able to come back, since there would be nobody to give birth to Art once again. Of course, there is no guarantee that would work. At the very least, she could have used literally anything else to try and help Gabby. She looks up to find Art has escaped through the window, which just reinforces my idea that if she had killed him here, that he would be dead for good. It is not exactly Art's MO to run from a fight. So who do you think could have actually survived Art's little killing spree? Because clearly everyone's walking away from that unscathed, right? If you somehow enjoyed the chaos, maybe give a like and subscribe, because why not? And hey, drop a comment below telling me which movie you'd like to see next, because clearly I'm dying to know. Oh, and just a little pro tip. Never, and I mean never, drop your magic sword into a bottomless pit.